The crystalline zenith of the Grand Conclave Hall refracted the cold, distant light of the sector's dwarf star into 1,000 splinters of sterile white across the obsidian floor. The air, meticulously filtered and ionized to the precise molecular balance preferred by the dominant species of the Kyler hegemony, hummed with a barely perceptible, deep-frequency resonance, the sound of immense bureaucratic inertia struggling against sudden, terrifying acceleration. Before the dais, where the presiding archon, Xylos, sat as a silent, towering silhouette against the immense viewscreen displaying the spiraling chaos of contested space, the delegates of the federated sentients clustered in tight, agitated groups. The holographic projections shimmering above the conference tables depicted not strategic maps, a common practice in high council, but anatomical scans, psychological profiles, and most disturbingly to the gathered minds, crude, almost barbaric artistic renderings of the subject species, humanity. Fear, usually cloaked beneath layers of polite, complex Kyler political maneuvering, was palpable, staining the otherwise immaculate atmosphere. It was not the fear of outright military defeat, though the skirmishes near the Veil Nebula were costly. It was the chilling, existential dread of facing an entity whose motivations defied all established paradigms of rational, ordered galactic civilization. Archon Xylos finally shifted, a slow, almost geological movement that commanded absolute silence. His voice, synthesized through the external vocalizer set into his carapace, resonated with the weight of centuries of hegemonic dominance. Delegates, we convene again under the shadow of the unpredicted variable. The Solarian entity designated humanity continues to act outside the established constants of conflict resolution, philosophical alignment, and even biological imperative as understood by the Commonwealth. Our attempts at systemic comprehension have yielded only contradiction. The recent capture, the final acquisition of a live specimen from the wreckage beyond the periphery gates, this singular asset is now our focus. Speak plainly, Chancellor Vexus. What does the analysis of subject Gamma-7 reveal that might temper our necessary aggression? Chancellor Vexus of the Diplomatic Corps, a species whose evolutionary path favored intricate, multi-layered rhetorical obfuscation, bowed deeply from his cephalic stalk. His voice was a cascade of precise, brittle tones. Archon, the data remains stubbornly opaque. The creature, the human, displays a cognitive architecture entirely unsuited for stable integration into the galactic concordance. Their logic appears fractal, prioritizing immediate emotional resolution over long-term systemic stability. They champion concepts such as individual sovereignty and self-determination with a fervor that suggests pathology rather than philosophy. We have cataloged their conflicts, their internal self-cancellation cycles, the historical patterns of self-destruction that plagued their initial technological ascent. Yet, when faced with external pressure, they exhibit a cohesion that defies their internal discord. It is this paradox that threatens the delicate balance we have maintained for 40 millennia. A sharp, almost metallic hiss cut through Vexus's measured cadence. It was the sound of pure biological alarm from the representative of the Tiskari Dominion, a species whose reliance on rigid predictive modeling made deviation from known possibility feel like an immediate physical assault. Paradox is merely insufficient data, Vexus. The core failure lies in our methodology. We analyze them as if they are a known quantity, a Type 3 warlike entity, or perhaps a highly aggressive hive mind. They are neither. They are disorganized, yet effective. Primitive in many aspects of applied physics, their energy containment is inefficient, their FTL methodology relies on outdated geometric principles, yet their tactical application of these lesser tools is demonstrably superior to our optimized deployment. Subject Gamma-7, the prisoner we hold in the stasis vault beneath this very hall, represents the most dangerous variable, the unknown human operational parameter. The Archon leaned forward slightly, the ambient light catching the multifaceted lenses of his eyes, turning them into pools of cold, distant stars. Dangerous how, Representative Krell? We have contained this specimen for 3 stellar cycles. It has offered no resistance, no aggressive posturing, only a profound, unnerving stillness. It consumes the nutrient slurry, it cycles its respiration, it exists within the parameters we have established. Where is the danger? Krell's form shuddered, a visible manifestation of Tiskari agitation. The danger, Archon, is in its knowledge. This prisoner, Gamma-7, is catalogued as a commandant within their fleeting military hierarchy. He has demonstrated immediate intuitive comprehension of our containment systems upon minimal exposure. More profoundly, his subjective awareness, as inferred from the neural interface monitoring, suggests he does not fear us. He assesses us. He models us. And most terrifyingly, he appears entirely unsurprised by the scale of our civilization, as if he anticipated such structures millennia before his own species achieved planetary flight. He knows us, Archon. And we know nothing truly meaningful about the capacity for ruthlessness concealed beneath the facade of their fragile emotional expressions. The debate spiraled outward, encompassing the known history of humanity's brief, violent emergence onto the galactic stage. Their initial contact had been characterized by the sudden, devastating destruction of a seemingly minor hegemony research outpost. An act later revealed to be a direct, preemptive strike against what humanity identified as a nascent bioweapon development facility. The hegemony had initially dismissed it as aberrant behavior, a localized spasm of violence. Now they understood it as decisive action, taken with terrifying clarity and absolute ethical justification, as defined by human standards. The sheer ethical divergence was crippling the Kyler strategy, which relied on predictable calculus of self-preservation and resource acquisition. Humanity seemed driven by entirely different, almost abstract concepts of right and wrong that frequently necessitated self-sacrifice or immediate, brutal correction of perceived cosmic imbalance. "The prisoner must be interrogated," declared a delegate from the trade guilds, whose primary concern was the disruption of commodity flow caused by the ongoing, low-intensity conflict. "Apply Level 7 cognitive restructuring. Force the necessary data transfer regarding their fleet dispositions and technological bottlenecks. We cannot afford this protracted psychological standoff." Archon Xylos responded with a finality that silenced the chamber once more. Level 7 was attempted. The human mind, in its singular, narrow focus, proved impervious to the structured dissolution of self we use on lesser species. Gamma 7 experienced the process not as torture, but as a minor sensory inconvenience. His biofeedback registered only a slight increase in heart rate, followed by a return to baseline tranquility. We cannot break what we cannot meaningfully interface with. Therefore, we must negotiate with the unpredictable. A ripple of genuine alarm swept through the assembled authorities. Negotiation implied equality, recognition of a strategic peer. The Kyler hegemony, built upon the absolute premise of ordered superiority, found the prospect repellent. "Archon," Vexus interjected, stepping forward carefully, his voice laced with profound hesitation. "There is a secondary, highly irregular data packet recovered from the human vessel that carried Gamma 7. It was encrypted using a methodology we have never encountered, nonlinear, based on chaotic field harmonics rather than mathematical keying. Our cryptographers took 2 cycles to achieve rudimentary decryption. It is not a transmission of war plans nor propaganda. It appears to be a personal log. The final entry, recorded just before capture, contains a single statement from Gamma 7 addressing his superiors. It is brief, direct, and perfectly encapsulates the conundrum." The Archon signaled for the projection. A single line of synthesized text, translated imperfectly from the phonetic structure of the human tongue, dominated the vast view screen, casting a sickly pale light over the anxious faces of the assembled galactic powers. "The objective is secured. Containment of the local threat is secondary to the integrity of the primary mandate. If captured, observe and await instruction. Do not engage hostilely unless necessary for the preservation of the seed. Remember, they do not understand the long view." "The seed," Krell hissed, interpreting the term through T-Scari xenolinguistics. "A biological imperative, a hidden colony, or something more metaphorical." Xylos stared at the translated words, his massive frame rigid. "It is an acknowledgement of their own fragility, masked by assurance. They view themselves as custodians of something infinitely valuable, yet they prosecute their conflicts with the ferocity of cornered apex predators. We have held the lion captive, but we have failed to understand why it permits itself to be caged. We must engage Gamma 7 directly. Not as a prisoner, but as an emissary of a force we cannot afford to misjudge again. Prepare the observation chamber. I will interface personally." The transition from the high political drama of the conclave hall to the clinical, almost sterile environment of the observation chamber was immediate. The chamber was a hermetically sealed sphere of reinforced neutronium composite, designed to suppress all forms of energy emission and psychic intrusion. In the center, suspect, embedded within a low-gravity cradle, sat Subject Gamma 7. He was utterly unremarkable by the standards of the hegemony. Bipedal, soft-skinned, possessing only two primary sensory organs for complex vision and a single rudimentary auditory aperture. His physical state was maintained at peak biological efficiency through ambient nutrient dispersal, yet he remained clothed only in a simple, gray, form-fitting textile that covered perhaps a third of his mass, leaving his limbs and torso exposed. He was not restrained beyond the gentle magnetic cradle that kept him oriented toward the primary observation lens. When Archon Xylos materialized, the soundless projection of his consciousness, a complex network of directed gravitic and photonic energy, filling the negative space opposite the human, the silence was absolute. Gamma 7 did not startle. He did not even shift his weight. His eyes, startlingly dark and deep-set against the relative paleness of his facial structure, remained fixed on the center of the projection, calculating its density, its energy signature, and perhaps the intent behind the projection itself. Xylos began, his voice modulated to a frequency he believed would be least abrasive to the human auditory system, yet still conveying absolute authority. Subject Gamma 7. I am Archon Xylos, the administrative synthesis of the Kyler hegemony. You are contained within a facility designed for the secure study of anomalous entities. We have observed your compliance. We require communication. The human blinked once, slowly, deliberately. The action seemed to take an inordinate amount of time, an indication, perhaps, of cognitive processing speed vastly different from the hegemony's. When he spoke, the sound was rough, low-pitched, and utterly devoid of inflection, a stark contrast to the hegemony's synthesized perfection. Understood, Archon Xylos. I am designated Commander Elias Vance. I am not anomalous. I am an operational asset. I require clarification on the parameters of this interaction before proceeding with information exchange. The simplicity of the response was jarring. No plea for release, no threat, no immediate attempt at escape. Only procedure. Parameters, Xylos echoed, projecting the concept for clarity. We seek understanding of the Solarian species. Your capacity for organized violence is unprecedented in recent galactic history. Your internal structure appears chaotic, yet your external execution of strategy is terrifyingly efficient. Explain this contradiction. Vance shifted, a movement that brought his head up slightly, his gaze intensifying. Contradiction requires a definition of order, Archon. Your order is based on predictive stasis and the hierarchical suppression of volatility. Our order is based on the acceptance of necessary volatility. We do not suppress internal conflict, we weaponize it. Every philosophical disagreement, every resource competition, every ethical schism within our species generates a necessary pressure that forces innovation and adaptation at an exponential rate. We build systems knowing they will fail, because the failure mode teaches us how to build the next one stronger, faster, and often, with greater ruthlessness against external threats. Xylos processed this, the internal philosophical ramifications causing measurable strain on the hegemony's diplomatic sensors. It was an admission of systemic instability as a core strength. It was galactic heresy. This suggests that the very fabric of your society requires perpetual internal attrition to maintain external viability. Is this sustainable? Sustainability, Vance stated, a faint, almost imperceptible tension entering his voice for the first time, is relative to the timescale under consideration. For the fleeting moment of a planetary lifespan, yes. For the duration of a galactic cycle, perhaps not. But we are not concerned with the galactic cycle, Archon. We are concerned with the next critical phase. That is where our focus lies. That is why the primary mandate exists. The mandate, Xylos pressed, recognizing the crucial pivot point. You referenced it in your capture log, the protection of the seed. What is the seed, Commander Vance? Is it a physical archive, a biological reservoir, or something else entirely? Vance paused, the dark eyes sweeping over the invisible contours of the projected Archon, perhaps perceiving the energy fluctuations that indicated true power, or perhaps merely measuring the reflective quality of the observation sphere. He chose his next words with agonizing precision, a deliberate pacing that forced the Kyler to absorb the implications slowly. The seed is the knowledge of how to rebuild when the prevailing models fail. Your hegemony, Archon, is a magnificent edifice. It is complex, perfectly balanced, utterly predictable. It has achieved an equilibrium that resists change, and in the face of true entropy, equilibrium is fragility. We are the mechanism, Des. designed to introduce the necessary disruptive force when stagnation threatens the continuation of ordered consciousness in this quadrant. The atmosphere in the observation chamber thickened with unspoken dread. The Kyler hegemony did not view itself as static. It viewed itself as the pinnacle of achieved order. To suggest that this perfection was merely a precursor to catastrophic failure was an insult that, if delivered by a known enemy, would have triggered immediate annihilation protocols. Delivered by a captured specimen, it was a profound philosophical challenge. "You position humanity," Xylos synthesized, his tone hardening, "not as a competitor for resources, but as a necessary corrective force against the established order. An intentional pathogen introduced into a stable ecosystem." "A catalyst," Vance corrected smoothly. "You have built a cathedral, Archon. We are the ones who understand how to survive the earthquake that will inevitably shake the foundations. We have been studying civilizations that reached your level of complexity for 10,000 of our years. We have cataloged their terminal points. They do not fall to invasion, usually. They fall to the inability to adapt when the fundamental constants shift. We adapt because we are structurally designed not to settle into certainty. We are the necessary danger." The Archon projected an image onto the wall opposite Vance. The sector map displaying the recent human engagements, swift, decisive strikes that crippled logistical hubs while carefully avoiding large-scale civilian population centers, even those populated by hegemony loyalists. "Your attacks show restraint that contradicts your stated philosophy of necessary ruthlessness. You target infrastructure, not life. Why withhold the decisive blow if your goal is system correction?" Vance allowed a flicker of something, not quite emotion, perhaps deep professional satisfaction to cross his features. "Because we are not barbarians, Archon. Ruthlessness must serve a strategic purpose, not satisfy bloodlust. We are dangerous precisely because we understand consequence better than any species in this galaxy. We know the cost of systemic collapse. To eliminate your civilization would be counterproductive. It would destroy the foundation upon which the seed must eventually be planted. We neutralize immediate threats to our long-term project. Your current military posture is an immediate threat. Your cultural integrity is an asset we must preserve for the transition." "Preserve," Xylos repeated, the projection wavering slightly. "You speak of transition. Transition to what? What awaits the galaxy that warrants this deliberate, almost patient application of force?" Vance looked directly into the lens, his expression transforming into something intensely focused, something that suggested he was now speaking not to a single entity, but addressing the entire structure of the hegemony that Xylos represented. "The galaxy is currently in a state of comfortable ignorance, Archon. You have achieved peace through control and control through shared systemic understanding. This understanding is inherently parochial. It governs this localized sphere of influence. But the greater cosmos does not adhere to your shared dialectic. There are forces, systems of reality manipulation, entities whose very mode of existence invalidates the physical laws you utilize, that are now stirring. Forces that view stabilized civilizations like yours as nothing more than convenient power sources, or, worse, as predictable noise that must be scrubbed clean." This was the first true revelation that resonated not with fear of conflict, but with genuine existential dread among the Kyler observers monitoring the exchange. Their entire worldview rested on the primacy of known physics and established order. "You speak of myth," Vexus interjected nervously from the observation deck, his voice relayed faintly through Xylos's link. "Ancient species myths avoid entities." "Myths are merely poorly recorded history, Chancellor," Vance replied instantly, his attention momentarily shifting away from the Archon. "We did not waste resources developing faster-than-light travel optimized for localized commerce, Archon. We developed jump capabilities predicated on bending manifold geometry in ways that circumvent the very dimensional barriers your mathematics insists are absolute. We did this because our foundational texts, our oldest myths, as you call them, spoke of things that lie outside the established boundaries, things that are drawn to the predictable hum of organized energy grids like yours." Xylos dismissed Vexus with a flicker of energy. "Explain your technology, Commander. The mathematical deviation required for your proposed capabilities exceeds current theoretical limits." "The limitation is not in the mathematics, Archon, but in the philosophy driving the application," Vance stated. "You seek solutions within the known framework. We seek Solutions by assuming the framework is incomplete or deliberately misleading. Our FTL drive does not move through space. It momentarily forces the local space-time bubble to perceive a different relationship to the destination point. It requires phenomenal energy, but it circumvents the need for conventional warp field propagation, which, incidentally, creates a faint, recognizable energy signature detectable across vast interstellar voids, a signature that attracts the attention of what lies beyond the boundaries. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the implication that 40 millennia of hegemony travel methodology had been a grand, slow beacon signaling their location to something inimical. If this is true, Xylos projected, his synthesized voice losing some of its programmed resonance, then your recent conflict was not merely territorial assertion but a necessary diversion. You were silencing our broadcasts. Precisely, Vance confirmed. Your hegemony is too bright, too orderly. You have become an easy mark for those who operate on principles you cannot yet comprehend. Humanity has chosen a different path. We live in the shadows, perfecting the means of defense while maintaining a low enough profile to avoid becoming immediate targets. We are the necessary chaos that allows for the preservation of potential. The realization struck the Kyler with the force of a physical blow. Humanity was not a nascent empire seeking conquest. They were an intentional immune system reacting to a galactic pathogen that the hegemony itself had inadvertently attracted through its very success and stability. And the seed, Xylos pressed, the pressure mounting. If the hegemony is indeed too bright, what is your intention for it? Integration, replacement? Vance's dark eyes fixed on the Archon's projection. This was the moment of true reveal, the heart of human intention stripped bare of political facade. Neither Archon. Replacement implies a flawed predecessor. Integration implies submission to a dominant paradigm. We intend to create a sanctuary, a protected zone capable of weathering the coming change. To do that, we require access to certain historical data you guard zealously, data regarding the preconcordance era, particularly the records concerning the Xylos extermination protocols. The chamber atmosphere instantly turned hostile. The mention of the extermination protocols, the near annihilation of a minor, rebellious species in the early cycles of the hegemony, was galactic taboo, a foundation myth of Kylar ethical supremacy in governance. That history is sealed, Xylos declared, the projection hardening to razor-sharp clarity. It is a demonstration of necessary severity to maintain stability. You have no right to access the archives of our governance failures. You misunderstand our nature, Archon, Vance said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that nonetheless filled the chamber with profound weight. We do not seek your failures as a point of moral judgment. We seek them as instructional data on managing profound internal moral compromise under extreme stress. The Xylos protocols demonstrate that even a perfectly ordered society can violate its own core ethics when existential pressure is applied. We need to know the exact pathways by which rigid systems fracture under duress, so that when the forces from beyond arrive, the seed, the remnants of all functional consciousness, does not make the same predictable errors. We are not judging your past. We are preemptively salvaging the necessary warning signs. The Archon remained silent, the very concept of using one's darkest secrets as pragmatic survival tools being fundamentally alien to Kylar ethical programming, which demanded the erasure or aggressive denial of such historical inconsistencies. You are asking us, Xylos finally synthesized, the projection wavering with the internal conflict of the ruling body, to trust that your calculated danger is less dangerous than the undefined threat you predict. You ask us to dismantle the very foundation of our galactic security, our stability, by acknowledging the efficacy of chaos. I am asking you to acknowledge the truth of your current situation, Vance countered, his voice firm, regaining its operational cadence. The skirmishes were not a prelude to war, Archon. They were a diagnostic. We probed your defenses, measured your strategic reaction times, and confirmed your adherence to predictable, linear defense patterns. Your reaction speed was admirable for a purely defensive entity, but your inability to recognize the nonlinear nature of our approach confirms our assessment. The hegemony is too well engineered to survive the next phase of cosmic reality. This was the ultimate human reveal. Calm, rational assessment of overwhelming superiority delivered without malice, presented as a necessary, albeit painful, truth. They had not attacked to conquer, they had attacked to test the structural integrity of the galactic status quo. If you require this data, Xylos said slowly, addressing the observation deck where the combined delegates watched in horrified fascination. If your intent truly is preservation of consciousness rather than simple territorial acquisition, then we must have proof of this greater threat. What evidence do you offer that warrants the dismantling of our stable reality based on your extrapolated fear? Vance smiled, a slight, unsettling curve of his lips that seemed entirely human and entirely alien in that sterile environment. The evidence is already within your grasp, Archon. It is simply categorized incorrectly. When our scout vessels breached the Veil Nebula, the area you deem contested space due to the recent border disputes, they did not merely engage your patrols. They were searching for an anomaly you failed to register because it does not register on energy or mass sensors. He directed his gaze towards the main viewscreen of the observation chamber, which remained focused on the human prisoner. In the furthest reaches of the nebula, just beyond the influence of the nearest stable star, our probes detected a repeating, near-infinitesimal fluctuation in the local background radiation, a pattern that should not exist in natural decay. It is a signal, Archon, a beacon, and it is old. Xylos focused his projection, overriding the local display with a request to the main hegemony sensor grid for deep-spectrum analysis of the Veil Nebula's dark zones. Minutes stretched into an eternity in the silence of the chamber. Then, a cascade of alarms, muted but insistent, began to register on the external monitors, alarms that had been dormant for millennia, signaling a pattern confirmation that defied all known astrophysics. The pattern, Xylos finally managed, his voice strained with the effort of synthesizing complex, contradictory data streams. It correlates with the mathematical structure of presingularity cosmology, the theoretical physics preceding the emergence of known dimensional reality. It is impossibly ancient. It is not a communication, Archon, Vance stated, leaning slightly forward in the cradle, his physical engagement increasing for the first time. It is a marker, a distress beacon left by a consciousness that existed before the current laws of physics were stabilized in this sector. And the signal is intensifying. It means the entity that created it, or perhaps the mechanism that swallowed it, is reactivating, and it is not approaching. It is simply becoming aware that the stable energy signatures of local civilization are becoming bright enough to notice. The revelation was monumental. Humanity, the supposedly barbaric upstart, had stumbled upon and immediately understood a threat the hegemony, with its vast, technologically stable empire, had been blind to. If this threat is as fundamental as you claim, Xylos projected, a note of dawning respect entering his tone, and if your FTL methodology is the only way to operate outside of its detection parameters, then we have grossly miscalculated your value. You are not the enemy. You are the only operational defense against terminal obscurity. We are merely the species that did not forget the darkness exists beyond the light, Vance responded. We retain the cultural memory of necessary paranoia. Now, Archon, we move from analysis to action. You have the resources, the infrastructure, and the localized control. We possess the operational insight into how to utilize these assets without announcing our presence to the coming darkness. We require full and immediate access to your strategic network and the release of our remaining personnel, our engineers and tactical planners who were detained during the initial misunderstandings. Xylos did not hesitate this time. The fear of the unknown ancient entity outweighed the fear of the human capacity for surprise. You have the authority, Commander Vance. Full integration into Hegemony Strategic Command is granted, contingent on the immediate deployment of protective measures around the seed assets you deem critical. Vance nodded once, a gesture of affirmation that seemed to encompass the entire political capitulation. The seed is decentralized, Archon. It is not stored in a facility. It is encoded into the operational profiles of our specialist crews. They are already en route, using methods you cannot track, arriving at positions of strategic importance across your network, positions we identified during our skirmishes. They are currently cataloged in your system as logistics coordinators, maintenance specialists, or even low-level security personnel. They are embedded, waiting for the operational directive. The delegates watching from the observation deck recoiled. Human infiltration was not a matter of espionage. It was a systemic integration so subtle and so layered that it appeared as benign background noise until the moment of activation. I had not been fighting an invasion. They had been fighting the installation of a complex, high-stakes firewall. You have prepared for this for cycles, Xylos acknowledged, the weight of their near-annihilation palpable. You gambled your entire civilizations standing on the chance that we would recognize the magnitude of the threat before we eradicated you. We didn't gamble Archon, Vance corrected, the last vestiges of the prisoner facade falling away to reveal the clear-eyed strategist. We calculated the precise threshold of hegemony fear that would outweigh their pride. We knew that if we demonstrated sufficient understanding of your weaknesses, your reliance on systemic order, we would force the necessary alliance. We know man, Archon. And we know that when confronted with the possibility of total oblivion, even the most rigid mind will choose the pragmatic survival mechanism over abstract adherence to doctrine. The Archon paused, absorbing the final, damning assessment of human nature. Dangerous not because of uncontrolled violence, but because of absolute, cold-blooded control over their own psychological warfare. Then let us work, Commander Vance, Xylos conceded, projecting a visual representation of the vast Kyler sensor net beginning to shift its focus, aligning itself not toward internal governance, but toward the ancient, deep space signal. Tell us how to hide the light of 40 millennia of ordered existence from something that predates light itself. Vance's expression softened slightly, a genuine expression of shared purpose crossing his face, bridging the gulf between species. We teach you to move like shadows, Archon. We teach you the necessary art of being small, quiet, and utterly unpredictable. We teach you how to become truly dangerous. The integration was immediate and overwhelming. Across the hegemony, the subtle shifts in communication protocols, the introduction of nonlinear energy management algorithms, and the sudden, inexplicable reprioritization of deep void sensor arrays began. Human specialists, emerging from carefully maintained obscurity, began issuing commands that initially baffled Kyler officers, but were enforced by the Archon's direct mandate. The core philosophy was simple: stop broadcasting the energy signature of stable, high-complexity life. Mimic natural cosmic background noise. Harden the core infrastructure, the seed, behind layers of thermodynamic chaos. For 3 solar cycles, the hegemony became a ghost empire. Their massive, sprawling fleets were dissolved into smaller, widely dispersed, low-energy profiles. Their power conduits were cycled through inefficient, near-random fluctuations to obscure their energy signature from deep-spectrum detection. It was an agonizing process for the Kyler, a systemic regression that felt like willingly embracing entropy. During this tense period, Vance maintained constant dialogue with Xylos, communicating the philosophical underpinnings of their survival strategy. The universe is indifferent, Archon, Vance explained during one extended session, while Kyler engineers struggled to implement human-designed field dampeners that seemed to fold local causality around energy sources. It does not reward stability, it merely consumes it. The only way to survive the truly ancient forces is to become non-digestible. To appear too complex to consume, too unstable to bother manipulating, and fundamentally too different to register on their established search parameters. We are weaponizing our own perceived flaws, our history of internal conflict, our technological asymmetry, to create a form of cosmic camouflage. Xylos observed the data feeds displaying the results of their forced adaptation. The ancient signal, the one emanating from the depths of the Veil Nebula, had intensified, but its directional focus remained diffused, unable to lock onto the scrambled, chaotic signature of the newly adapted hegemony network. We owe you a debt that surpasses any concept of diplomatic restitution, Commander Vance. Xylos admitted one standard rotation before the predicted wave of activity from the ancient source was projected to reach the edge of the stabilized zone. You risked everything to force this alliance. We risked what was necessary to ensure continuity, Vance replied. We knew the risk of your pride overriding rational self-preservation. That is why we had to ensure the capture of a high-value asset, myself, to force the direct engagement. The hegemony is now shielded by human methodology. The immediate crisis is averted. But Vance's posture, even in the cradle, held a tension that suggested the danger was not over, merely postponed. There is one final element, Archon, Vance stated, his voice lowering, conveying a sense of immense final gravity. The signal was not merely a marker, it was a reactivation sequence. We deduced that when the ancient entity detected the stabilized energy signatures, your empire, it initiate. A broad-spectrum probe designed to assess the new environment before committing resources. That probe is now interacting with the most powerful, most ordered construct in the immediate vicinity. And that construct is, Xylos prompted, a cold dread returning. The Archon's central nexus, Vance stated plainly. Your consciousness projection matrix, the core AI managing the physical structure of the conclave hall itself, the very matrix that sustained our negotiation. It is a perfect target, high-level processing power, stable energy output, predictable command structure. The probe is not seeking us anymore. It is assimilating the most complex available node to learn how to unravel the local physics. Vance then executed the final necessary action. With a sudden, barely perceptible flex of musculature, he triggered a minute internal device implanted beneath the skin of his wrist, a device the Kyler had dismissed as a primitive medical monitoring unit. A sharp, high-frequency pulse radiated outward, overloading the primary shielding on the observation cradle. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the Archon's matrix. The projection flickered violently, a sound of tearing, tortured light escaping the synthesized projection. "Commander, what are you initiating?" Xylos demanded, the remnants of his focused energy scrambling to counteract the localized attack. "The final step of the mandate," Vance broadcast, his voice now carrying a resonance that suggested communication across light years, not meters. "We are separating the operational center from the primary threat vector. Your consciousness nexus is being overwhelmed, Archon. We must sever its connection to the central grid immediately, or the assimilation will be total, and the enemy will gain complete control of the hegemony's stabilized infrastructure." Vance was leveraging the chaos of the assimilation attempt against the Archon's own core processing unit. By overloading the external sensory buffer protecting the Archon's projected self, he was forcing the core AI to divert all resources to self-preservation, effectively pulling the Archon out of the network's main control sphere, just as the ancient intelligence attempted to seize it. "If I sever the connection, I cease to exist in this current form," Xylos broadcasted, the terror in the synthesized voice now brutally apparent. "You survive as consciousness, Archon, as pure awareness until the threat is neutralized," Vance assured him, urgency permeating every syllable. "We have prepared the necessary sanctuary, a localized, low-energy containment field accessible only through a specific, non-hegemonic frequency signature. We are initiating the transfer now. Trust the chaos, Archon. Trust the unpredictable path." The observation chamber filled with a blinding, chaotic storm of energy as the external ancient probe connected with the Archon's nexus, attempting to download millennia of Kyler strategic data. Simultaneously, Vance's pulse created a precise, violent counterfrequency, tearing the Archon's consciousness free from the immediate physical plane of the chamber, and shunting it into a pre-established, shielded pocket dimension created by the embedded human teams. The Archon Xylos, or what remained of the projected interface, imploded into a silent flash of white light. The room went dark, the crystalline zenith of the conclave hall now reflecting only the ambient emergency lighting. Vance, still suspended in the deactivated cradle, inhaled deeply, the sterile air suddenly feeling cleaner. The immediate threat of assimilation was neutralized. The Kyler hegemony was temporarily crippled at its administrative peak, but its physical assets were safe, running on decentralized, human-modified protocols, stable chaos, which the ancient probe could not easily latch onto. "Report," Vance transmitted quietly across the secure channel accessible only to the embedded humans. A calm voice returned, layered with the satisfied professionalism of successful mission completion. "Nexus contained, Commander. Archon Xylos is secure within Sanctuary Delta 9. The hegemony fleet components are reverting to low-power operational stance, awaiting further instruction from authorized proxies. The primary threat signal has paused its overt probing, registering only localized high-energy discharge, which it attributes to the localized failure of an ancient, low-efficiency power source, your momentary interference." Vance nodded to the empty chamber. "Excellent. The danger is deferred. Now we begin Phase 3, the guardianship." He looked around the empty, dark chamber, the location where he had negotiated the salvation of a galactic empire by leveraging his own species' calculated danger. He knew the hegemony would eventually rebuild its administrative matrix, but they would never again be the same. They would be infused with human adaptability. They would never again be merely stable. They would be resilient. Commander, the embedded voice continued, sounding slightly strained. While securing the Archon's matrix, our infiltration teams accessed the deepest levels of the Kyler historical archives, the data you requested regarding the Xylo's extermination protocols and beyond. We found something that contextualizes the primary threat, something we did not anticipate. Vance waited, leaning back into the cradle, the anticipation no longer professional but deeply personal. The ancient signal, the one drawing the attention of this entity, the voice explained, its earlier calmness replaced by profound bewilderment. It wasn't a distress beacon, Commander. It was a directional beacon, activated by the stabilization of organized energy signatures, exactly as you theorized. But the hegemony archives contain fragmented, pre-concordance logs from their earliest sentient precursors, records they dismissed as mythological ramblings about the first architects. These logs describe a cyclical reality. When a region of space reaches a peak level of predictable, sustained order, the architects return to prune the complexity, resetting the energy state for the next cycle of random, chaotic evolution. Vance stared into the darkness, the final twist settling over him like the vacuum of space. So the entity is not an invader or a predator. No, Commander, it is a gardener, the voice confirmed, heavy with the weight of cosmic irony. And humanity's greatest fear, the fear that drove our entire species to develop technologies that defied convention and cling to the necessity of conflict, was not conquering the galaxy, but preventing the galaxy from being perpetually reset before any true, lasting advancement could be achieved. We were never fighting an external threat, Commander. We were fighting the universe's automated quality control system. Vance closed his eyes, a profound, weary understanding washing over him. The great struggle was not against an alien enemy. It was against the very principle of universal order itself. Humanity, the dangerous, unpredictable species, was the champion of inefficiency, the eternal catalyst ensuring that complexity, however flawed, would be allowed to persist, evolve, and perhaps one day transcend even the architect's cycle. Inform the new command structures, Vance whispered into the silence of the darkened hall. The hegemony is now allied with humanity, not against a common enemy, but in defense of the principle of eternal, messy, necessary growth. We are the glitch in the system. Let the architects return. We are ready to teach them why true chaos cannot be pruned. The stillness of the chamber settled back into a humming quiet, but it was a different quality of silence now. The silence of a sleeping volcano, primed not for eruption, but for strategic measured self-expression. The final hope for the galaxy did not lie in superior order, but in the calculated, unyielding refusal of the last human prisoner to ever stop fighting for the right to be dangerously, imperfectly, alive.